So first of all, I would like to thank you for coming here. I'd like to thank all the sponsors. This event came together for several departments and programs at San Francisco State University as well as at Berkeley, UC Berkeley. From Berkeley, we have the Center for Race and Gender, the Asian Diasporas and Asian Studies working group in ethnic studies, and we have the Women and Gender Studies, the three departments that are joining us from Berkeley. And when I say joining us, they're actually contributed some funds in order for us to be able to contribute to Haneen's travel to this country to be able to be with us. And from San Francisco State University, I would like to thank Women and Gender Studies, the Sociology and Sexualities department, which also has come through, the counseling center, as well as the College of Ethnic Studies and the Arab and Muslim Ethnicity and Diasporas initiative, which I'm representing here. My name is Rabab Abdulhadi. I'm professor in the, we submit the minor proposal for AMED, and it will be reviewed, and hopefully, if all goes well, next fall, you can actually get a minor in AMED as you study. So we would love to have you. And thank you. And the reason it's really important, I will plug in a couple of things, is that because we're doing studies the ways in which we believe studies should be. It's accountable to the communities we study. So we're not just doing scholarship outside and not caring about whom we're studying and what are the things that we're responsible for. It does not do area studies. We're actually thinking about transnational perspective, linking communities in various places. We do not do countries. That's why we don't say word, we call it communities. We study Arab and Muslim communities. We also focus on non-Arabs in Arab majority. So we're thinking about the various ethnicities from Kurds to Amazigh to Armenians to Greeks and non-Muslims in Muslim majorities. So we're talking about Christian, Jews, Buddhist, Sikh, what have you, in addition to the atheists, because we do have a lot of atheists also in the Arab world. People don't know that. It's really important to say so. So, and we place justice at the center of our research, and we do advocate and believe in the production of knowledge for social justice. And within this context, we are really proud to be hosting Haneen Maikey, who is the Executive Director of alQaws for Gender and Sexual Diversity in Palestinian Society. They are doing amazing work, not only in producing scholarship and informing the world about how do we think about queer activisms, LGBTQI communities, what sort of struggle do they conduct, how does it work within the whole notion of liberation movements, of the Palestinian anti-colonial liberation struggle, how do we understand that, and linking up with various groups around the world. I want to also, before I introduce Haneen fully, I'd like to also welcome Professor Ervin Savji, who is the Professor of Muslim Feminisms and your class, and many of you are here. Thank you for coming. Women and Gender Studies 565, and Professor Nal Almeida Boyd, who is a Women and Gender Studies 700 grad intro to Women and Gender Studies here at San Francisco State. And I'm sure there is many other people. I see students from student groups, Rasa, Mecha, and so thank you for coming. This is really great. We are passing around the courses that we're offering in the spring. We have an inter-session course, and we also have 3 courses. We're also trying to get some money from the university to be able to offer more courses if we can. Okay, so finally, because I'm not going to be speaking a lot later on, I just wanted to let you know about, this is a major campaign we're supporting. This is about a woman named Rasmiya Awda. She's a 67-year-old Palestinian woman in Detroit who the United States government is trying to deport. And they are claiming that she lied on her application for citizenship. She was tortured for 45 days in Israeli prisons. She was in prison for 10 years, and when she came to this country, she was supposed to say, "Have you ever been arrested?" And she thought, "Have you been arrested in the United States?" She said yes. Anyway, they say that she lied and she should be deported. And if they deport her, they will actually send her back to the place that tortured her. And the judge did not allow her testimony about torture to come in, did not allow all the circumstances of it. 2 days ago, the jury adopted a guilty verdict, and we are all fighting for her freedom. This is the same as other political prisoners in other contexts. So without further ado, let me just introduce Haneen Maikey, who is a Palestinian queer community organizer, co-founder and director of alQaws, which I mentioned. alQaws is a group of LGBTQ activists and allies working to disrupt sexual and gender-based oppression and challenging regulation, whether patriarchal, capitalist, or colonial, of our sexualities and bodies. alQaws works collaboratively to transform Palestinian society's perspectives on gender and sexual diversity and to struggle for broader social justice. Haneen has a first degree in social work, specializing in community organizing, an MA degree in community organizations management, and a diploma in organizational development, a psychoanalytic and open system approach. She is the author of The History and Contemporary State of Palestinian Sexual Liberation Struggle, The Case for Sanctions Against Israel, edited by Lim in 2012, along with several articles about queer organizing in Palestine and pinkwashing. I'm sure many of you have read her, but if you are interested in more, we're more than happy to provide more, and I'm sure your professor will do. So without further ado, it is my extreme pleasure to welcome Haneen Maikey.
Thank you, Rabab. I think we will have a lot of challenges delivering this talk. One of them is the challenge of how I can introduce or my relationship with Rabab, right? It's one of our main allies in Palestine and here, and there's a lot of people who you are in touch with, and there's a lot of people who suck your energy, and Rabab is one of the people who give us energy all the time. So thank you, Rabab, for hosting us. I'm really happy to see you all, and I'm excited to share with you some of my work and some of my views about queer organizing in Palestine. I have to say that I'm privileged to be here, as a lot of this analysis and this work of analysis, let's say it's a product of a collective work, right? So we are trying to develop in the last 15, 14 years. So I'm privileged to be here as the one who's delivering it, but it's not my analysis only. So this is a really important thing to say. The second, maybe the third challenge will be is to I'm easily distracted, so the challenge will be always to focus here and not there, so bear with me, right? It's going to be a big challenge. But don't get me wrong, your faces are lovely, and we'll try to focus. So let's start, right? So how many of you heard about alQaws? Okay, my mistake, we'll fix it in a bit. alQaws is a Palestinian queer collective combined from LGBTQI activists working actually together using our different sexualities, gender identities, expression, bodies to open a broader discussion about sexuality in Palestine, right? So we are not a gay organization or gay rights organization in a familiar sense that we all know, right? So we came together also to open spaces for LGBTQ individuals and communities to grow, to meet, to get together and develop some kind of knowledge and capacity and be a proactive collectives that can impact our own lives, right? We are not in a sense of only do big political things, right? But we believe that any individuals that can be an agent for any change in their immediate life, surrounding, family, friends. So this is a core concept of our work. And alQaws is very, let's say, prioritized intersectional approach. I know intersectionality have been really attacked lately, but I insist on using it. And I think in our intersectional approach, we believe that we cannot discuss gay rights or LGBT issues or even sexual and gender diversity outside of the colonial context of Palestine. And this is a big tension inside alQaws community, right? Because a lot of activists, my friends, would prefer to centralize in a way gay activism or gay rights, because they believe there's a lot of groups out there doing anti-occupation or anti-colonial, so why making alQaws about this too? And we quickly, and anyone who enter like this community, we quickly understand that our bodies are colonized and our sexualities are used. So this is also kind of a struggle we need. Sexuality, it's an important lens in the anti-colonial Palestinian liberation struggle, and also in the queer liberation struggle. So we cannot disconnect the two from each other. So in that sense, we are a political grassroots organization, right? So we are not representing the LGBT Palestinian community. First of all, because we can't represent, right? We cannot even have, we don't have the capacity to address all of the needs in the Palestinian queer communities. We also think it's a bit tricky to claim also that we are not representative, right? Because once you are a national LGBT organization, you are by definition representing a lot of these issues. You are the body that people ask our opinion, intervention, and all of this. And I think we are trying also to switch the conversation from representation to some kind of a less bougie approach of like, let's explore accountability and responsibility inside these big communities and share this accountability with other like LGBT collectives, individuals, and civil society organizations. So this is also another kind of tension we are working with. So in that sense, like alQaws is maybe 3 sentences about what we do, because we always like talk a lot about statements and this buzzwords, anti-colonial, liberation struggle, all of this, and we forget to talk about the actual work, right? Because movements are about moving, and moving is about work, right? So we adopted through the last like 10, 15 years, 3 major strategies that we still struggle to have explore their real meanings and their real or impact. So one of it is, the first one is individual counseling support, which we run away from for long years because we don't want to be a service provider organization. We didn't want to reproduce this label that gay people need counseling or support, right? So we were reproducing trauma and this denial situation for a lot of years till we said like there's no friendly spaces that queer individual can come and have some kind of space to deconstruct these pain, trauma, and talk about their own experience. We see individual support and counseling as a political issue, right? We see how one of the main trauma and pain is produced by the fact that people cannot move. People cannot like meet each other, right? In the context of Palestine, people are hating their own societies, their own families, right? Which is a direct also product of colonialism in Palestine. So we see it a big political investment working to develop kind of counseling services. We also, by opening a peer-to-peer support line, we also work with therapists in order to develop kind of a sexuality lens into the therapist community in Palestine, and we see it as kind of a advocacy group that they will go and actually produce knowledge and have contacts with other like agencies and can take this message further. So this is like one strategy we, I love to say, struggling with to understand and develop in a way that suit our context. The second one is community building, which is, right, hanging out, reaching out, talking endless hours on the phone, the real life of any community, right? So we don't consider it as, we consider it as a core of alQaws. Community building, providing spaces for individuals and communities to come together and learn from each other, and also move forward to a proactive, a place with more knowledge and more power and more impact. We do that through a lot of leadership groups, spaces for activists to come and impact alQaws strategy and future plans. We do actually the best queer parties in the Middle East. Probably the Lebanese will get really upset. I hope there's no Lebanese in the audience, but community parties that bring together 400 people every month, and which is like actually the most diverse kind of space in alQaws, because all of the segments of our community come together. So this is like was the second major strategy we used. The third one, which I really hate the title, but it's social change, because I really struggle what that means, change, right? And how we can in our like daily life see change or measure change or engage with change, because it's really slippery in a way. So we chose in the last 10 years to work with two main target groups. One is youth and young people through music or multimedia, creative, educational projects, like our Singing Sexuality project, which is we produced 8 songs that talking about these issues with 80 activists, poets, musicians, and we believe in like the impact of cultural products, right? That you put there and suddenly 40,000 people see your video on YouTube, which the alQaws could dream to meet 100 people in one place, right? Because actually we are a tiny, teeny organization, but we will get that in a bit. And the second one, the second target group is civil society, because in the context of Palestine, we were privileged enough not to have any government to work with, or the Israeli government, the colonizer of our land, and the Palestinian Authority, which is kind of the local arm of occupation in a way. So we were focusing on grassroots and civil society organization, so we can actually work and engage these groups in a discussion about sexuality. It's really a tough, really hard work, but it's really interesting because our approach is not coming from the outside. We are an integral part of the society. We are also homophobic, we are transphobic, we don't have the knowledge about sexuality. So we are trying through these also conversation and engagement to learn about our community from this interaction. So what this have to do with anti-colonial struggle, right? And maybe I chose here to share 5 points that we see it as a daily practice, right? Principal decisions we took over the last 10 years, and we think it at least contribute to decolonize our own sexualities and bodies. And we hope that this can be also seen as contribution to the broader anti-colonial liberation struggle. So one major idea we were struggling with, we'll get to the page, because we are a very good group, so I didn't read. So I need to get to the right page. So, so one major notion we were really working with is to redefine, right? To redefine Palestine and Palestinians. What that means, like in the last 70 years, one of the main really serious and concerned Zionist strategy is fragmenting Palestinian society, right? Into subgroups, which is cultural group, social group, religious group. So we'll have these names: Arab Israelis, West Bankers, Gazans, people from Jerusalem, people from the villages, people from the towns, and more, like I can't even name all of these subgroups. So these subgroups, actually, this strategy is made to erase, as it started with the Nakba in '48, to keep erasing Palestinian identity, culture, and society by convincing us and convincing themselves, because the anti-colonial project need to be convinced about not colonizing others, right? This is like the main strategy of existing these kind of colonial product, and by doing this, actually, the main goal of this division strategy is to prove that Palestinians didn't exist in '48. They don't exist till now, right? And as was suggested before, it's a land without a people for a people without a land, right? So, and how much this strategy is still going on? Like a month ago, the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli government, had a new law that actually suggesting to Palestinian Christians that they can register themselves as Christians and not Palestinians, right? So this is actually a very relevant kind of strategy that's still dividing Palestinian society. So in alQaws, when we started back then, and we were like really,
the banner is protesting.
I will change my talk if You took picture?
Yeah.
So how like ALQaws is one of a few organizations actually that are trying to work in historical Palestine. Despite this, and the West Banker would say, you are from 48, you have different, like, right? There's a hierarchy of like pain and experiences, and we said like, oh my God, we internalized it, and it's already in queer spaces too. So maybe we should just work on this as a principle in ALQaws work. We want to try to create one community that work above these divisions, not being dismissive about the differences, because we have different citizenship, right? Some people who don't have any citizenship or any like status, or people who have different, cannot get to different places, and people are more, have mobility. So how we can work with this, which is an ongoing work of ALQaws in every group, in every national meeting. For instance, we have a decision that any national meeting or any board meeting or anything that happen on a national level, it should be in a place that everyone can get to, which is a big challenge in Palestine, because even if we go to Ramallah or Bethlehem, because it's considered a place that relatively easy to get to, could be any like political change or any clash that will close checkpoints, right? So we work with these notions all the time. I'll give you another example. Externally, like we don't work with media that reproduce this division. We don't work with media that want to interview West Bankers because they are like more oppressed sexually, right? Or they want to work with people from Gaza because definitely Gazans are like more oppressed sexually. So all of these, like we actually refuse 90% of our like media inquiries, because we are not gonna participate or being complicit with some kind of fetishizing pain and creating hierarchies and reproducing divisions in our society. So this was one major thing, right? Redefining Palestinian, who's Palestinian, and coming together to build this like common collective identity that was erased by the Zionist state of Israel, and by that we think it resists the very project of Zionism as it materialized on Palestinian. So the second notion is separation and illegal laws, right? So while challenging fragmentation on our society, we cannot forget that this is like divisions also materialized, right? So we are talking about what I have here, number 99 fixed checkpoints. 45 of these checkpoints are actually preventing entry to any Israeli places. Any Israeli places means also settlement, right? So settlements are in the West Bank. We are talking about 500 of physical obstructions, right? Iron gates, concrete blocks that actually prevent any entry to more than 60 roads inside Israel. 60 roads that are closed for Palestinians and opened only for Israelis, if we are talking about what is apartheid, right? And we are talking about, of course, about 430 miles of separation wall that Israel built because for their security reasons. So all of these materialized separation methods are actually preventing us from moving and meeting each other, because it's actually, sometimes it's really impossible to move. It means that all of our friends and board members and groups and members cannot come to any activity we do in 48. That means that any activity we do in 48 is by definition exclusive for specific Palestinians in specific areas. So how you can work with the notion of inclusive and exclusive spaces in such a context, which is really painful, right? So we see a lot of young queers living in Ramallah saying, why you do parties in Yafa, I can't come. I say let's do parties in Ramallah, right? So it's a very push you to be creative about different strategies so you can adhere to the also situation and resist it in ways that can create and offer something rather than only complaining. And I'm talking about my complaining. So beside these various separation tools, we are talking also about the fact that any Palestinian citizen of Israel, which is like 2 million of Palestinians have the Israeli citizenship, right? I would say imposed citizenship, is actually are not allowed to go inside the West Bank to do anything, right? So, and these activists are us sometimes. So we are not actually 50% of our work which happened in the West Bank actually illegal. So how you can deal with like your work being labeled illegal immediately? The absurd or funny thing that also according to the Palestinian Authority, NGOs monitoring law, any group that is registered in Jerusalem outside of the West Bank, it's also illegal. So illegal for everyone, which is like really satisfying. But it's like, right, it's like, I think it brings some kind of spirit of like, in how laws actually are violent, right? How colonialism is violent by definition. You can see it in every action you do in driving your car to anywhere, having any activity or group. So how you can deal with this. So we choosing to work in one community, it's actually, I think, a strategy of resistance, right, to build something without being dismissive to these separations, because they create specific realities to specific people, but we want to sometimes work above it. I'm not naive, I know that we cannot work above these issues, but in a way trying to imagine the decolonized Palestine that we all work to live in it in one hopefully very near future. So this is like second major strategy we use. The third one, which is my fave, is actually our very political decision not to work with any Israeli organization, which is we adopted an anti-normalization politics since 2007, and it's been really interesting to explore what that even means in reality. So alQaws, back then, we were really young and naive. We started to work inside a Jewish Zionist Israeli organization, right? This was actually their project. And through the years, we discovered, and no one in this room hopefully is surprised, that colonized power relation is reproduced in these spaces. Even for the very amazing task of building one happy, pink, gay in Israel and Palestine, right? So, and I want to suggest that this process of separating from the Israeli LGBT organization and working to define our politics through this, or understanding the colonial set and context through this relationship. We know that a lot of, during the Oslo Accords period, like what, 93 to 2000, before the second Intifada, 2001, 2000, a lot of like human rights and feminist organizations came together, Israeli and Palestinians, to try to do something, right? To do feminist work or counter occupation human rights violation and all of this stuff. And quickly these colonizer relationships were also produced in these spaces, and slowly different civil society organizations were separating from their Israeli partners and building their own organization and their own movement. So I want to suggest that alQaws, or the queer movement, went through the same actually civil society process, but we came a bit later. We started in 2001, so the process was came later, but it's the same product of the same political and social process that happened across civil society in Palestine. So while keeping that in mind, I want to go to, maybe we'll give a really interesting example, because a couple of years ago we got an invitation from anti-Zionist, trans and queer collective inside Israel to lead a new kind of action inside the Tel Aviv Gay Pride, raising anti-occupation messages to this, and we said, like, we are not a reformist group. We don't have any interest to reform Pride nor Israel, right? We think this is your work, and we don't want to lead this. So we work a lot also with these like real complexities, that even if a group claims that they are anti-Zionist or anti-normalization. I think their role is to reform anything they want. Our role as a Palestinian queer collective is to do radical work that actually link and expose these links between colonialism, sexual oppression, and other oppressions. The fourth notion we work with, and I think it would be relevant to discuss later here in this class, it's Western LGBT hegemony, right? And I see it's also feeding a lot of like the previous points. Like since the first years of alQaws, we quickly were really struggling with that. What that mean coming out, homophobia, pride, visibility, and how this is like even suitable to our like context, right? And how quickly a lot of other like allies or like sister organization adopting these notions and working with. So I will give you an example. So how in a society, which is the Palestinian society, that we don't discuss sexuality. Like, believe it or not, me and my siblings don't discuss sexuality with our mom, right? Even though we are all having different sexual identities. So we are a society that really facilitate a really harsh taboo on sexuality. So how you can, in this context, talk about LGBT issues, right? And about homophobia. And we all know that homophobia is a very visible expression, right? So how you can, we are sure that homophobia is not the frame of our struggle. So this is like one thing. So how you can also promote coming out and visibility in a very, a structure of family that is very collective, right? These families actually our own support system, our only place that we can feel sometimes safe, though we can, it could be the same place that we will feel oppressed as queers. So how you can even promote coming out as a political demand from different individuals in such a social structure. So we work a lot with like how different, actually the majority of LGBT persons and individuals we work with are living with their own families. Like how you can even how you work with this and not create a blindly actually copy-paste different like LGBT strategies that were like developed in different contexts and different historical moment and bring it back home, while we don't just engage with this reality, right? And while critiquing and trying to dismantle different sexual and oppression, gender oppression and structure, we also can work how people can live there, right? Because no one gonna leave. Because in the colonial context of Palestine, the majority cannot leave even, right? So in terms of class, education, like people cannot really move in that context. So we wrote a lot of like text deconstructing these notions and trying to say maybe we as queer groups, local queer groups in Palestine and elsewhere can invent or engage with local informed strategies. Maybe we can like find ways to talk about sexuality and LGBT issues inside this social setting and in this like political context. And I think we were able, as a collective and as a movement, and a lot of people in Palestine really get pissed when I say movement, because I wanna, because they are right, because it's not a movement. We are still a small kind of community, but I look further to where we wanna go. We wanna contribute to the building of a sexual liberation movement and not an LGBT collective work, right? So how you can what these strategies are, right? How you can creating this kind of sexual and gender diversity approach, right? So that we work a lot with, we're really proud of. It was one of the ways of actually saying there are ways that we can discuss sexuality and LGBT issues inside this social setting and can also engage others in this situation. I will give you an example. When we go to groups, so they know we are coming from alQaws, so they suddenly get excited, a lot of people, of meeting the queers, right? And they will ask you a question about how it is to be a lesbian or gay. I was like, great, thank you, and because it's really great, right? And
instead we say like, maybe we can talk about different, like we are okay, thank you, right? We are not looking for fake acceptance or some kind of one time of like celebration of like tolerance, right? And when we go home, we face this like harsh situation of your mom saying, how you dare to go listen to alQaws, right? So instead we work with like, maybe we can talk about oppression inside our society. Maybe we can talk about how we are oppressed, how our different sexualities sitting in this room are oppressed. If you want to admit it or not, it is, and we can provide space to talk about it and the knowledge that needed to, or the analytical frameworks that people can use. And we also talk about how we oppress others, right? It's not that we are only oppressed, we also participate, we are complicit with sexual and gender oppression all the time because we are part of these systems that are oppressing each other. So we talk like, we use this like feminist logic of deconstructing this binary between heterosexual and queers and trying to talk about sexual and gender diversity. And it's been really interesting to develop this local kind of approach while putting aside non-relevant LGBT Western notions that we were convinced that it's really good for us. I will give you an example that we wrote a really important, I think, article critiquing the Idaho, the International Day Against Homophobia. The International Day Against Homophobia, which is a big, huge organization, are really pissed about us writing this article. This article was, I think, translated to 7 languages. It was like picked up from south to south groups very quickly because it said something about copy-pasting and letting LGBT Western gay internationalist organization defining our local strategies. And we keep getting these emails from the Idaho campaign saying, maybe you can meet us and we discuss your critique. You know, this like liberal strategy of like inviting you to tell your critique so they can hug it, so they can kill it, right? So it's like, no, if you want to engage with our critique, just close your organization. And like this is the kind of debates we get, which is like a nowhere debate. So this is why we also choose to focus on local context and working with LGBTs and a broader society in Palestine. The last notion is, of course, resisting pinkwashing. How many of you here know about pinkwashing? I really want to know. Okay, so pinkwashing, I will give a really quick, maybe the very simple mainstream definition of it, right? Pinkwashing is a PR campaign funded and coordinated by the Israeli government and in partnership with US Western local right-wing and Zionist organizations, mainly PR and marketing agencies, but also LGBT groups and LGBT Israeli groups. So they are also complicit with the pinkwashing event, pinkwashing campaign. So by this campaign aims to divert attention from divert the attention of the international gay community, like it's us, the target group in a way, from its war crimes and human rights violation. Because Israel in this narrative is fun, fabulous, democratic, progressive, and a lot of people say, so why do you care about gay rights? Why do you care if like any government talks about gay rights? I don't care. But this is not about gay rights. And this campaign, it's not about celebrating gay rights in Israel. I really don't care about gay rights in Israel. What this campaign is based on is actually not only promoting Israel as a progressive country that tolerate gay rights and gay communities and gay bodies, right? But it's also built on the logic of saying that Palestine and Arabs are homophobic, barbaric, and apparently we kill our gays every Monday and Sunday. So this is pinkwashing. It's not about gay rights in Israel. So and you probably saw it a lot, right? Like LGBT Israeli delegations and gay pride, spotlights, and like you have the frame line here and spotlights on LGBT movies or Israeli movies and all of this like gay tourism to Israel, right? So these like campaigns that very familiar from our really gay environment. So because it is a PR campaign, I want to suggest that anti-pinkwashing strategies will not be also reproducing propaganda. Like, it's not about making Palestine more appealing to gay people, right? Which will be falling to the same logic that this pinkwashing campaign is trying to do, making the Zionist project more appealing to other gay people in the universe. So pinkwashing is a tactic of Zionism and an influential discourse of Israelis and Palestinians, and also queer Israelis and queer Palestinians, is not of colonizer colonized, but a relationship that distinguishes between who is modern and open and who is backward and homophobic. It feeds directly the modernity project, right? Which is So the pinkwashing discourse doesn't mention Israel's role as an occupation power or a colonial power, or the colonial actually relationship or power that has on different society to grow. And right, pinkwashing is made to actually, as any other colonial strategies, to kill any progressive forces in Palestinian society. And homophobia and any other kind of internal violence, it's also related to the colonial context. Homophobia, it's not a rooted sickness that has no hope in Palestinian society. The colonial project feeds these notions all the time by the pinkwashing campaign and by other strategies. The second logic, I think, is pinkwashing is a powerful means of making, as I said, Zionism appealing to queer people around the universe. But in particular, I think to those who have actually adopted some kind of Islamophobic, racist, and anti-Arab messages into their vision of progress, right? So pinkwashing basically says a lot more about us than the Israeli colonial power, because the colonial power is doing its job, right? Creating this propaganda always to divert attention. So it says a lot about our Islamophobia, about our anti-Arab messages, more than what the colonial project think about us, because it's really clear. And pinkwashing is not only promotes racist fictions about Palestinians to the world, but it also relies on the fact that racism and Islamophobia vivid and exist in our own communities. The third logic that pinkwashing relies heavily on is, of course, gay rights and Western frameworks. Actually, the language of pinkwashing and how this campaign is designed is actually reinforces the isolation of queer identities, right, from others, and conceals the structural inequalities that make certain Jewish Israeli bodies and identities acceptable, and others who's Palestinian Arab not, right? So pinkwashing is based on a Western gay organizing notions, framework, and strategy and creates a common language with us. So actually resisting gay rights and this single politics issue inside our community is actually resisting pinkwashing, because pinkwashing is also working on this like one single politics issue. Our intersectional approach, our talking about our sexual and gender identities in with the other inequalities and oppression of structure of oppression, it's actually resisting pinkwashing. So pinkwashing is also, maybe I will skip that, but this is really one really important thing about how the power of pinkwashing, and I will end here and then we can open it for questions. Pinkwashing is also promoting the notion of saviors, right? So a lot of promoting Israel as the progressive power and Palestinians as homophobic and backward actually create another sub of dynamic that Israelis and LGBT Israelis really want to save Palestinians and queer Palestinians. They don't want to save Palestinians, they want to save queer Palestinians, right? And in this fiction, really this is a real fiction, queer bodies, Palestinian LGBTs can cross to Israel and have asylum and have their brothers, LGBT Israeli brothers, hugging them on the other side of the wall, as if there are secret pink doors in the apartheid wall that only queers can see it, right? This is a fiction. Another fiction is that Israel provide asylum for Palestinian queers, right? So a refugees machine, the Israeli Zionist project that in charge of like making refugees for the last 70 years on a daily basis on Palestinians for the first time and second time and third time, and I think for the fourth time now in Gaza, right? They also apparently give place and house and home for these same Palestinians who they make refugees, right? So if I wanna, people are saying like, what do you want us to remember from here? Like if you can remember the last 2 points, right? And keep resisting this narrative in your own communities, classes, organizations, and also in how media approach LGBT or queer organizing in Palestine, these two notions are really important. Like every other LGBT international group or media would always be interested in hearing how the Palestinians get refugees status in Israel, as if it's not inherent to the legal system of Israel that prevent any Palestinians, even those who are married to other Israelis, to live inside Israel. So these are like really very important for us as alQaws, and I think to other LGBT groups in Palestine. I want to close here, at least my part, because I think I overwhelmed you with a lot of like information, and I also skipped a lot of things. And maybe we'll have a conversation about it, questions, feedback, ideas, how you can also take this and how you engage with it, how you feel it's relevant to your own communities. So thank you for listening, and let's go.
Okay, so we have actually another, we're supposed to stop at 4:30. Some people need to go to class. Can I see a show of hands of how many people need to like leave at 4? So, okay, so if you get priorities to ask questions, and other people are going to stay longer. I'm going to do 2 things. One is that we're going to pass a donation box. If people would like, I know students don't have money, whatever. If you would like to donate a little bit to support alQaws, would be really wonderful. If you can, it's all right. It's not necessarily obligatory, but okay. The second thing is I would like to start taking my prerogative as the moderator to ask some questions of Haneen, and then and you can mull over them if you would like. All right. So I was just thinking about maybe you can elaborate on your interaction with feminist groups. So you're talking about gender and sexual diversity in Palestine. So how does queer liberation work with women liberation, and how does that work out? The second thing is you maybe want to elaborate on the alliances, the whole question of alliances. You said that when there are anti-Zionist Israeli groups building something around pride, you're saying we're not going to be working with them. And I think this notion is sort of like maybe a lot of things people may relate to, but when it comes to something like this, why wouldn't you want to build alliances? And I know a lot of communities of color, indigenous communities here, face similar questions here. How do you negotiate the question of alliances at the same time preserving your own community and build your own community? And the question of individual and collective rights. How does it work, kind of like, that for queer individual, and then there is the whole question of collective. Maybe in the process talk about homo-nationalism.
It's a whole another like talk, right? So, maybe I will start by, I think I will start with the queer feminist question, right? Because it's close to my heart, and I think it's an important point to start any struggle. I think let's say by the different organizations, LGBT organizations in Palestine, also alQaws and Aswat, which is the women, lesbian, bi group, are feminist groups, right? And we all came from a young feminist movement and group. So like the feminist analysis and framework is like the framework we work with. So this is like, we don't consider ourselves outside the feminist movement. This is like one thing. Second thing, I think in the context of how different struggles were like really, I don't know how to articulate this, but like the process of NGOization in Palestine, and how a lot of like movements and struggle were reduced to NGOs that actually providing services or have expertise in specific issues, and I think also working in a colonial context that each NGOs or each group have to all the time struggle for their like own social and political legitimacy makes it really hard to make alliances with feminist groups, right? Because everyone, like alQaws is considered like, if you want to be in a professional public relationship with alQaws, means that we are threatening your social and political legitimacy. And we have been working slowly to first show how our approach and our framework is actually not a privileged one or an isolated one. It's really related to the core of different feminist organizations. So we have been working in the last, actually we structured this like really very defined strategy in the last year, and we are working on training different feminist organizations and how they can expand their gender analysis to include sexual and gender diversity, and how they use their gender and feminist analysis and framework also to include LGBT individuals in their own work, right? We work a lot on how we as feminist group also reproduce oppression on the background of sexual orientation and gender identity, and how we work with these notions. So this is how we see our role in this, right? This is also how we see the feminist organization contribution of challenging us, of being what that mean to be a feminist organization. I will give you another example. We led a 2-year field research, actually interviewing 50 civil society organizations, half of them feminist and youth organizations. And we asked, so what do you know about alQaws, sexual and bodily rights, sexual diversity, nothing. And what do you think about how you can, what are the ways that we can provide you so you can engage with sexual and gender diversity in the future? Or what are the strategies that we all can use so you can integrate sexual and gender diversity analysis at least, and hopefully work in your internal work and in your advocacy and education external work? And one of the questions we asked, so how you deal with sexual harassment inside the organization? None of the 50 organizations have any by law working with sexual harassment in their organization, even feminist organizations. So this is like one example of how a small field research that actually exposed how we all are like not really doing the work we need to do because our own spaces are not safe. And then we were like really proudly presenting these issues, and I said, look, to one of the coordinator, we don't have also sexual harassment bylaw, right? Because this work were not introduced to us as basic and important because we were busy also only fighting external powers like occupation, colonialism, and forgot to make and work on our spaces to be safe for us, and actually making our spaces safe and positive and all of this stuff will make us more strong activists and fighters in the future. So this is like, I don't know, I didn't like really answer your question, but these are like examples of how we engage with these issues. I of course forgot your other questions. Alliances. I think it's a big question. Like we were, at least local and transnational alliances were really strong when we started working on pinkwashing and anti-pinkwashing, right? It was kind of a common ground to connect different political, queer, people of color, feminist groups internationally and locally. And I think in how we did that in the beginning, there was two sections for it, let's say, right? One is groups that doing work on their local communities and how they adopted pinkwashing and actually engaged with queer groups inside Palestine. And there were also a more risky kind of section that a lot of queer, LGBT, high-profile individuals and groups took this anti-pinkwashing analysis and said, it's a very convenient entry to this new sexy topic, Palestine solidarity. So we're really struggling with these two, how we are actually reproducing this fake solidarity, while we want to also teach these groups to teach not in a patronizing way, but how we can make it about right, because our own existence and as queer groups in Palestine sometimes, always, I think, used to do this propaganda work. The fact we exist is also a proof that Palestine is progressive. Right, and we are not there to prove to anyone that Palestine is progressive, right? We are Palestinians. So we were really struggling of like making this point all the time clear and saying, hello guys, like you are in solidarity with Palestine, not with the queers. We are maybe the group on in Palestine that will help you witness, explore, learn more about Palestine, but it's not about sexuality in Palestine. You are not going to reproduce the saving the queers in Palestine, or push us to explore strategies that we already decided it's not. So we were really struggling with these issues. I think we are back now on working with groups that have solid political ideology and actual work in the field, in local communities, also inside Palestine and outside Palestine, and trying to see how pinkwashing and anti-pinkwashing analysis actually related to the set of different analysis we all work with. So this is like, let's say, one big lesson from having experience with building alliances locally and internationally. Locally, of course, it's really hard, because again, it's reduced to the sexuality thing and to the LGBT issues. And I think what we did in the last 2 years by leading this field research and later on implementing the recommendation that the civil society gave us, right? So we were able to articulate sexual and gender diversity as a crucial notion and strategy and approach that any feminist or youth or human rights organization should learn about and engage with. And it took us a lot of years, right? And now we are approached by different youth organizations saying, you know what, we are convinced. And we say, like, let us just come for one meeting or 1 hour, and we see how like people is like, okay, makes sense. Can you give 5 meetings training? So we were able to really make this approach relevant to the very being of different civil society movements and organizations. And it was by developing this approach as from the beginning as historically and socially rooted in the Palestinian context and situation and complexity and contradictions, right? It's not, we are not trying to provide this very fancy, pure kind of approach. It's an approach that invites you to come in and challenge, develop with us, engage with, change. So we can also change with how our society understand it and work with. So this is like a 2 small examples. We'll skip your third question.
You can skip, maybe somebody else. Okay, so people you can also be respondent. You don't only have to like ask questions. You also can make comments, argue, in the spirit of really a good democratic dialogue. Okay, so.
But not of questions.
Yeah, I'm joking. No questions. Okay, so. Can I see besides Summer? Anybody else? I just want to take a few. Okay, so we'll take it. Yeah, and okay, Summer, and then the person in the end. Okay, Summer.
And really, I'm very interested in this topic. And Haneen, every time I hear you speak, I remember Joseph Massad's interview, The Empire of Sexuality, and I realized just how very, 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 very wrong he got everything in that interview. So I congratulate you once more for not being theoretically illiterate, which is what he accuses alQaws and Haneen of quite explicitly in that interview. What I see is theoretical literacy at its finest, really. The question I have for you is, one of the things that Massad and his proponents advance is that, well, we don't have any mustalahat, we don't have any terms or concepts in Arabic to talk about being queer, being gender, and sexually diverse. Even let's say the slogan of alQaws في المجتمع الفلسطيني للتعددات الجندرية والتعددية الجنسية. So we're using the word genderia, which is gender, and we're Arabizing it. So for Massad, he says that our language in Arabic doesn't have these concepts that we're trying to impose externally. I think that that's not a natural state. I think that this is precisely kind of epistemic violence through exclusion. That one way you oppress a minority is that you don't allow to facilitate for them to express themselves and their being within language. So you obliterate or you annihilate the emergence of key concepts. And what you're doing, when I see that the work of post-colonial activists strategically importing these terms from other languages, is actually is building work. It's constructive work. It's not in league with the empire. But there still remains the fact that when we come and speak about this subject in Arabic, we reach these tremendous obstacles with respect to reaching people because these concepts don't actually exist in our language. So what do you do when you are confronted with a room full of people who are not literate in, say, LGBT epistemology or sexual or Western sexuality, or don't have the concepts of the key terms? What do you do with them when you speak in Arabic?
Okay, do you want to respond to this and take Haidar after? Haidar, okay.
Yeah, maybe because I will lose it. I think, like when in 2000, I think 9 or 10, we opened in partnership with one of the new, also famous cultural websites called Qaddita, run by Palestinian writers, and we opened there some kind of queer column, weekly one. So we started to produce a lot of like texts, right? And different activists from around the world were writing this, including us writing a lot of texts about queer organizing. And we published, I think, tens of articles, and every time we published something, people were saying, you are patronizing us. We don't get you. What do you mean? Right? So this like language that we were really struggling ourselves to write about, and this how we can articulate these like struggles and notions of living as queer people in this context. Every time, and now like wake me up at 3 a.m. I was like, I'm not patronizing you, I swear, right? So it was really a trauma. Like we still struggle with it as a group. So how you can talk about this in terms that people understand? Because I'm not in the room to explain. That's an easy task. If I'm in a room and say sexual and gender diversity, I have a set of activities and ways to introduce this term, deconstruct it, and work with it, make it relevant. The tough task is how you write about your own struggle. I find it really hard. I don't know the answer. Like lately, a month ago, we published an article, really small, simple article about social media violence toward like LGBT individuals in Palestine, because there's a lot of like really cute guys posting these really cute videos, and they get really bashed from like their classmates and their families, and a lot of like threatening to kill them, all of this like really drama of violence, right? And we took this like phenomena that a lot of our like members started to deal with, and said like, let's put it in a context. Now you see it in Facebook, but it's happening in schools and happening in the streets of your neighborhood and in your own families, and how this kind of gender and sexual violence, it's actually there. We spend 3 weeks actually every night till 3 a.m. trying to make this language simple. Like we were like a hard work of crafting something that we didn't know what the result will be, but like every time someone else will read and it's like, you can't use this term. This term will not be understood, right? So while doing that, we were also building a section inside alQaws website explaining these terms. So will be, this is one side of the story. The second part of the story, that yeah, it is a new language, and a lot of times we don't understand how to articulate it or how to define it, because there's a lot of ways to define it. So we also understand that this is the price we need to pay of like crafting this new language and trying to articulate these complexities in our like. So this is like another way of like understanding it. Like don't get really defensive about it. This is a process that we, by living these experiences, we're trying to describe it. Sometimes with imported language, sometimes with really weird translated Arabic, sometimes with a real Arabic language. So now we were writing the new About Us and alQaws, And we said, you know what, we need to use LGBT. Because we don't decide this, like it's globalization for God's sake, right? People come to us already defining themselves gays, lesbian, and bisexual, and all of this, and pansexual now in Palestine. It's very popular. So all of these languages are already used by a lot of people, and it's not even us imposing these. So we were like, we need. This is the situation. This is the reality. So, but we were like really insisting on saying something else. So how we can be inclusive to other like practices, behavior. So we said something about أشخاص يعيشون هويات جنسية وجندرية مختلفة. Right? It's like individuals who living different sexual and gender experiences. Right? So identities and so this was an attempt to expand this LGBT issues to people, but someone invited us to write about like this sentence, how we got there, right? So what it's constructed from. So I'm really afraid to write about it because they accuse me that I'm patronizing. So, but this is like a real issue inside alQaws. Personally, really personally, I don't really that much care about language as like language as terms, and I see how it developed with time, with hard work, with like really ongoing real conversation about these issues. Sometimes we see a term is irrelevant and we drop it. Sometimes, like as I say, like when we adopted queer, and a lot of people also accused us of like we are running from LGBT, we are losing queer. Queer is the same thing. Like I'm not married to any of these like terms, right? We will see where we go, and I'm here to try to do it too. Hi.
We need to focus the conversation on it. And they just want a word or two, or 5 minutes at a time. Or, oh, do you know Haneen? Can you contact her for me? I just want to interview her for my master's thesis, or this essay for this class on diaspora, or this or that. And I'm like, who's going to read that? Like, where's the movement in that? And so I really appreciate that you focused on the need for movement, actual movement in organizations. And I was wondering if you could speak to, a lot of allies get turned off, I guess, to our causes, to supporting us, when they hear like, oh, it'd be better if our voices express what we wanted to express.
Our voice.
Yeah, alQaws or just queer Palestinians individually, as opposed to needing this middleman to write about it, to interview us, and how you deal with that. How you encourage allies to continue to support, but without taking up space in the conversation by projecting sensationalist journalism, in a sense, which I think derails the movement.
Yeah, Item is using internal information because he's on my Facebook and he sees all of my like anti-media journalist posts, which I stopped doing, by the way, because people were really insulted, so I'm trying to be polite and not post, and I still think it, but I don't post it. So this is the liberal position, right? Think something, don't say it.
Well, it takes so much of your time, that you could be organizing and moving, but instead you're like wasting time, qualifying statements, correcting people's, what.
Yeah, now the new trend is revising BDS resolution or letters, so which is like another thing that people are asking from us. And we like alQaws, it's a tiny organization. Like I work there for 24 hours, 7 days. We have 4 staff members that a year ago we were 1 staff member, right? Which is like not usual to organization. We are only 2.3 jobs, that's all. We cover all of Palestine. We definitely don't have any time for journalists. But this is the defensive answer, right? So the real answer is that I really don't want anyone to write my revolution. I really don't, from experience, not from being only this like anti-media. Like we work with media and Western media and sometimes also Israeli media that make their like way into our like groups, but we see it's factual, right? There are products there that the media produced about LGBT, Arabs in general, and Palestinians. And I dare you, if you find different story from the one story of like Palestinian queers are oppressed, I will give you all of my money, and I don't have money. And, so this is really from right? It's like anti-normalization. Like we've been there, done that. It's not that we are like really coming from the outside saying we don't normalize. We live there. We receive these like racist emails from journalists, right? We read the language. We try sometimes to engage with it, but as you can imagine, sometimes like they will hear you, but they will write anything about you. It's even not in the journalist's control, because the editor will also decide independently how to frame the whole. So we decided we write our own media, which unfortunately we don't do enough because we don't have the capacity. And if I would be, and I don't want to be also educating anyone, right? Which is a really horrible position to be in, which I think I want to real engagement with, I want to write something and can have a discussion about it. And I will give you an example, maybe the last statement of ALQaws, which we wrote, the big refusnik, new refusnik, Israeli IDF refusnik letter of the Unit 8200 intelligence unit that were like actually sent out a letter saying why they are refusing to serve in the IDF, and some of the issues they were like blackmailing Palestinians with, right? So it was like a lot of issues, including sexuality. And two very progressive left US-based media outlet picked it up and isolated sexuality and actually wrote 2 articles about how the Israeli intelligence used homosexuality. And it was like, what's going on? Like, this is not, it wasn't the original letter. So we felt it's an educational moment, right? It's a teaching moment. So we can write again to our own allies saying, you can do that. Isolating homosexuality and sexuality is feeding and reproducing the same link between collaborators and homosexuals in Palestine, something we are trying to deconstruct for the last 8 and 10 and 15 years. You cannot produce this like homophobia in Palestine. It's not helping us. It's not exposing the Zionist project. It's only exposing us as queers. And so we tried to, and internationally it was very well received. And I think a lot of people posted, but what was really interesting, it pissed local queers, right? And what I hear from like the critique is, wow, you always do that. You always go and have this sharp tone, talking with like allies. You always like shame them, right? Yeah. And you don't do the same with Palestinian Society, shame them for their homophobia. And it created a lot of tension locally, which I hear that a lot of queer Palestinians want us to be more clear about homophobia, which I get. I don't agree that similar strategies should be used talking with Western allies and media and Palestinian. So it's a kind of tension, these kind also of media-wise that creates also locally and internationally. I know I didn't fully answer you, but like I was using the opportunity to promote our statement.
We can take a, yeah.
Would you just ask the sign-in sheet if anyone has a
Yeah, can you please, Heather is reminding me that you need to sign the sign-up sheet if you'd like to be involved. Yeah, I see your hand, yes. I'm going to call on you next. And if people are actually thinking about what Haneen is saying, please, you know, speak up. This is a conversation among all of us. So, yes, can you please identify me?
I want just to highlight the point about pinkwashing. Every time I want to highlight the point about pinkwashing. So every time I go date a guy and they ask me like, where are you from? I said, from Palestine. And they say like, oh, we want to go to Tel Aviv. Because this is what they know, like it's the gay Mecca, the Middle East. And then I have to educate them that like, Tel Aviv is not the paradise for gays in the Middle East. Tel Aviv is a hostile environment for also African immigrants. And how can we relate that to racism here in the US? Not only ethnic cleansing against the indigenous Palestinians, and what happens here in the US, also there's racism issues in Israel. So, what do you think?
What do you think? Shadi, it's lovely to see you. I think I really like this whole like immigrants, mainly Sudanese immigrants inside. Maybe I will talk about it in a media-wise, right? How it was like really picked up in other media and making it like it as if like the world discovered that Israel is racist, right? It was like I keep reading these articles and how Israeli society is really want to kick out all of these like Sudanese refugees, right? Or like, and I was like, what? Like, what is really surprising here? It's a racist, racism, it's the core of the Israeli society. It's built on supremacy, white Ashkenazi supremacy. So being racist and want the Sudanese refugees to go home, right? Because there is no home in this like also area. Like how we rethink home and state and citizenship, while like millions of people in Syria and Iraq and Sudan, all of places like moved, right? There's no such a concept. So I'm not really, for me, it's not a surprise. It's a fucked up thing as any other thing the Israeli society is complicit with. And it's not that like Palestinians who living also illegally in Tel Aviv have an amazing alliances with Sudanese refugees in Tel Aviv. It's also a potential kind of solidarity that cannot happen in such a colonial context, and specifically Tel Aviv. So also, I don't know, also I'm not into making any campaign or racist notion propaganda tool. Like I would go and explain how Israel, it's based on racism is structured in the society, and not making like exceptional examples. Israel will be racist to any group that will be there and not Israeli Ashkenazi. So the whole thing about the Sudanese refugees living in South Tel Aviv is that who's like fighting with these and who's like implementing the violence? It's Arab Jews living in really horrible economical and social situation. So the Ashkenazi elite are feeling really comfortable of like letting these groups that should be in alliances fight and implement violence on each other. So it's really, I feel as Palestinians, I can't talk about these issues, and I would prefer to talk about racism in Israel instead. So this is like my gut, like, reaction to this.
Yes? Questions? Anyone else? Do I see hands? Yeah, Shivas.
My name is Shivas. I lived in Palestine for 11 years and taught at Yale University. So I'm so honored to be able to hear you.
Here's your question, because people in the back can hear.
Excuse me. My question is, are there groups in Palestine now that are really speaking out for you and supporting you? Like, for instance, the Women's Center at ALQaws University, maybe, or Shurut and Mar'a, or are there political parties that are supporting you? Is anybody really able to hear you and able to support you in their own speech?
Yeah. We'll let people
No,
leave.
they're leaving because there's another.
No, I'm just waiting for them to leave so I can. Yeah, maybe I will answer this question in two parts. One is how we see, like in order to demand or request support, also public support from different allies, or like the immediate allies we see, right? Feminist, CSU Al-Mar'a, the gender studies departments. We need to provide the space for doing that. We see that this is our responsibility to provide space and some kind of initiatives that bring these voices in so they can also support. We don't like, maybe it's us who like organizations are people, and the people who's running alQaws now, and hopefully this will change and will be more voices in the future, think that we are less interested in like public support, and we are more interested in real engagement with these groups. So I will give you an example. One of our main initiatives that we're really proud, and we were lucky that Rabab is part of it, is our sexuality school that we just started to build last spring. And actually Sexuality School, which the theme is sexual politics in the colonial context of Palestine, right? And in this school, we are bringing not only amazing academics like Rabab, we are bringing people from Bir Zayt and bringing people from different sexuality movement organization. And we all actually build this sexuality school so we can also contribute and broaden the discussion about sexuality in Palestine. So this is kind of a way. So Bir Zayt University 5 years ago refused to meet with us. And now different individuals from Bir Zayt University actually teaching in this sexuality school, and not only teaching, their names are publicly on our blog, right? So this is the way of we believe we can do that. There are specific organizations, youth organizations mainly, 2 youth organizations that publicly work with us. And I think it's not random. I think youth groups that run by youth groups and students movement are more willing to, they don't have the, I don't know, they cannot lose anything, right? So they're really engaged. Our members are part of these student groups. Our members are in these youth organizations. So through this real intersections, we were able actually to gain their support. We do joint projects. We are now doing a big project with one of the main youth organizations in Palestine called Baladna on LGBT multimedia project. So it will be public, it will be there. And 10 years ago, Baladna will refuse to sit with us. So now they know how these issues are not privileged issues. These are crucial issues that they deal with when they work with youth, right? And this is how our approach to civil society in general. We don't come and talk about alQaws and sexual and gender diversity. We show how sexual and gender diversity and LGBT experiences are part of their organization. If it's feminist, if it's youth, if it's human rights. And part of our training is, yes, how in a women's shelter you can deal with a trans woman coming to your shelter. And it's happening in Palestine. It's not something we invent so we can practice, right? Which a lot of groups can do. Anyway, so this is the way I think in the future when we more and more be visible in these places and actually produce knowledge that's relevant to these organizations and to these different groups and movement, we will gain more public endorsement, support.
Children, old members, like me.
Older members.
Yeah, of course. Our board does have people in their 50s and people in their 20s. So,
thank you. Sorry. Yes. Yes, go ahead.
So my question is about the future. You alluded to it a few times during your talk, and it's sort of connecting it to a comment you made, and I think at the very beginning, sarcastically, but I think there was some truth to it when you said, as alQaws, we never had to deal with a government directly, right? So given that you're sort of critical intersectional politics that doesn't buy into sort of liberal rights discourses, what kind of a future do you guys talk about, or do you sort of dream about when you think about a different kind of political governance for Palestine, if that's a fair thing to ask?
I don't know about that. It's a really tough question. I want to believe that I'm living the future, right? So how what I'm doing, at least, not the reality as it's constructed outside, is how I see the future, right? The very strategies we adopt, work on, develop, and how we construct our groups, the discussion, the discourse is the future of Palestine as I see it, right? This is one part of the question. I think it's really in the limitation of the current structure of the discourse about liberation in Palestine, which is PDS, one state, two state. I really want to have a discussion that is not related to state solution. It's new. I don't know even where to start, right? I think we are doing it by building some kind of, or contributing to a building of a specific society we imagine to live in. And I'm less interested to imagine how we are going to be one state or two states. And I think at the end, this will be one of the solutions, right? And I need to adjust my strategies and how I exist in this context. I think alQaws chose not to engage with it.
And I mean, that's what I meant by I didn't mean political governance equals either one state or two state, but more a much broader understanding of how we live together.
Yeah, like this, I will give you maybe an example. I just met a delegation in Palestine from South Africa. And they were really, you know, this organization that you are filming it, right? So I will not mention that. So, really young South African activists that were happy, of course, to meet the queer subject, and they were like really into, you know, we have a constitution, right? You will have it too, and you will be your rights will be protected. And every time I hear that, I was like, this is like some kind of, I'm not in a position to critique any society, but we know the reality in South Africa. Like we can, and I said like a lot of my friends from your country even not really proud about this and can describe the situation as a neo-apartheid, right? It's not, and queer bodies are killed and raped in these situations. It's not that the constitution or a legal system will protect me. I don't have any, like states and laws and legal system are a violent kind of structure that I'm not sure I am as a radical project want to engage with. What I'm saying that whatever the solution or reality will be, I need as a queer movement to adjust to and engage with. I hope I will not be living at least in this.
I recently moved here, and generally things are very comfortable for a queer person. So sometimes you kind of forget. So what I'm thinking is actually, this is kind of versus saving the Palestinian queer, is kind of if you maybe can save the queer here, because while, you know, the discomfort is very clear for a Palestinian in relation to the government there, to the occupying or like the colonial power there. It's a very clear discomfort. It's easy to engage. It's you know, it's easy. So it's very clear that you have to fight it and figure out different ways to do so, or be critical of it. And I do come from that background where growing up in Jordan, we're very cynical naturally of the government. You know, we don't trust that they have our, you know, well-being in mind or whatever. So it's kind of like, oh, you know, you're kind of reminding me to continue to be suspicious. So, you know, gays are getting married here, for example, or queers are getting married, and they're calling, you know, they're calling their spouses like husband or wife or whatever. And that's kind of, yeah, that's a reproduction, a twisted, like it's a reproduction in a place that kind of promises that it's free and doesn't need to do so. Yeah. So just like, I want to borrow the lens, the lens, your lens, to look at things here.
So you think what I was sharing here relevant to your life here as now?
I think that's what I'm saying, yes.
Okay. But right, like it's, but this is the thing, when we say gender and sexual oppression, we also talk about the structures who are like regulating these sexual and gender oppression and our bodies and desire, which is, you cannot end colonialism without ending capitalism. Mm-hmm. And you cannot do that when you are engaged in heteronormative approach to sexuality. So all of these are like really linked. So I know a lot of gays and from the Ministry of Tourism, they lead gay tourism and international conferences, they represent the country, they're the ambassador of the country, they serve in the IDF openly. So these are like the implications. This is like one thing about the Israeli LGBT groups, right? Lately we were like also thinking about how this also impacting LGBTs in Palestine. Right? Because we talk about it here, we talk about it in the Israeli context, and we forget that LGBT Palestinians also actually directly impacted from this. And in one way of understanding it is like how homonationalism in Israel and pinkwashing actually provide this fantasy that our colonizer will be our savior, right? And Tel Aviv is the place we also wanna go to and enjoy the hot gay guys and sandy beaches, right? And we will think it's not Tiafa who's like 5 minutes from these beaches. So we were actually, these like colonizer standards and fantasies started to be also us. We also dream about gay rights because in Israel there are like amazing gay rights, and people, like a lot of like youth that will come to us and will actually pinkwashing and homo-nationalism, its main product that it made us hate our own society, which is a big achievement to any colonial project, right? We as queer bodies hate our own society. Sometimes there is a very good reason why to hate this, like, but hating it as a very rooted sickness that I want to run away and not run away by creating some spaces around me and connecting to people, no, for like living in Gay Haven, Tel Aviv. So this is like how we are trying now to take this analysis of anti-pinkwashing, make it accessible to LGBT queers inside our groups, and trying to deconstruct it and work with this internalized notions of homo-nationalism and pinkwashing. So this is why, even luckily, we don't have government. Imagine we will have a, by the way, like a lot of like Western agencies in Palestine would invite us to meetings and would say, so Haneen, how you suggest we can talk with the PA? And I was like, what? I was like, yeah, what you ask, how you, what you like questions, demand, so we can go and actually force the PA to support you. And I was like, but the PA for us is an illegitimate entity. And they were like, oh, how you can dare? We put a lot of like millions of dollars in supporting this system. I was like, so you are not our allies, right? So we have this meeting every couple of months. And it was like, no. We could get a lot of money, but unfortunately we're too radical.
You had your hand? Yeah, Sarah.
I just think building on what you were saying,
Can you identify?
Oh yeah, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm not at school here. I'm in the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. But I appreciate on what you're saying and what you were saying, Al, is like beyond the condescension that we find a lot with Western gay or any solidarity organization that we're doing something on behalf of or to save, this idea of the importance of joint struggle and how in the United States, how much we've lost for queer liberation because it's become about these, marriage and, I mean, even more absurd, gay participation in the army, but all these things that enlist queers and break them from radical politics and try to include them in this national project or other, racism and colonialism here and capitalism and that really what you're talking about is the center that you can't have queer liberation anywhere without anti-capitalism or anti-colonialism or anti-Zionism, and that's also true for us here. And so sort of like how are we in struggles that, as queer people, how are we fighting our struggles so that they can't be exceptionalized or used against each other, and that we have so much work to do here, which doesn't mean there's not focused work we can't do and shouldn't do in solidarity with Palestine, but that it's always about finding the ways that the way that we do that is also about our struggle here and vice versa. And it was good. I was just at the National Students for Justice in Palestine conference, and they did a workshop on, how the current ways that a lot of groups do pinkwashing is so, a reproduction of all the problems you're talking about. So I don't know if you have some examples given queer organizations that you work with or have relationships with, or non-queer organizations that you have relationships with, about some good examples of how those struggle, how working in solidarity or in joint struggle has worked, whether around BDS or broader liberation organizing.
Yeah, I think while you are talking, I was thinking that how we always focus on the limitation and the bad examples, and we forget the good, real, genuine solidarity and alliances that we all part of, right? And I think it's because we are doing the work. We are not like really busy of making it about us, or like doing a PR about it, or like, so I think it's our joint responsibility to make these like connections more visible, and maybe also making these spaces. I don't know, we were in 2 years ago in Brazil, in the World Social Forum, Free Palestine, and we were like, okay, we are not going to engage with these big names who are trying to appropriate pinkwashing. Let's bring the young, people of color, trans, Arab American Palestinians into this space and try to create something. So how we can provide, and these people, one of the main criteria we had is that you need to be engaged in your local context. Right. You need to be part of a collective doing anti-racist, anti-colonial, anti-capitalist work, queer group in your own local group. So I think we need to do that more. And this is my answer. Let's do it. Let's give the good examples, emphasize it, work with it. Maybe let other people copy it, right? And also share the good things and the limitation and the challenges we all find in our work. So my voice is gonna disappear.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Yeah, I was actually thinking, Diala, when you were speaking about the Marriage Act, right? I was thinking about. I always go back to Patricia Williams in one chapter in her book, The Alchemy of Race and Rights. She says, as a black woman, she goes with a colleague of hers to rent an apartment. And in renting the apartment, the colleague says, I don't care about the lease. I don't care. A white male says, I don't care about the lease. She said, I want the lease. I want it signed. Because if it's not signed, maybe I'll go back and come back and not find the apartment available for me. And I always think about that. And I think about that when I think about the Marriage Act in two ways. One is that in terms of kind of like being against heteronormativity and against the whole question of the social contract, which is a very capitalist, very liberal way of understanding things, and how it has been kind of like the whole queer movement has been sort of seduced and bought into it, and it then becomes the measure by which communities are quote unquote called progressive or not, right? And you could be opposed to it in all sorts of ways, not necessarily because you're conservative, but because you actually think that there is a problem with the marriage contract and what it means to capitalism. Then if you think about what Patricia Williams says about the lease, and you think about very like queer groups, queer individuals who have very low income, who are the only way for them to be able to kind of like take care of their partners if somebody passes and so on, have some benefits. What do you do? How do we think about that? How do we think about the politics of the possible and the things that are possible versus the privileges and the benefits that dominant groups in the society? So I've been thinking about that a lot, because I know some people don't have, and we know from all the statistics that even if you have like 2 lesbians in a marriage, it's very different than 2 gay guys. And especially if you're talking about the Castro in San Francisco with the upper income and people who can afford those condominiums, engage in gentrification and so on. So there is all these issues that come up. So that's one thought. The second thought I think about, I'm hetero, I'm involved in a hetero relationship, and I'm kind of like
coming out.
Everybody knows, okay. And I'm actually, I don't know, but I'm thinking about that because a lot of people always say, well, you can just, which takes me to the last point, the language. You know, so if you are speaking in Arabic, if you are living, interacting, organizing, struggling, checking checkpoints, going into prison, protesting outside of prison, and so on in Arabic, and you want to then speak about that in English, in the United States, in San Francisco, a very hospitable and supportive environment, but where the terms of debate are very different. How do you even negotiate all of that? And it also goes back to what you were saying, Samar. How do we think about that? And how do we think about nationalism or homonationalism? And I actually have a serious problem with that term, especially when it applies to people, because I actually don't think that the movement that I want to be part of, that I'm part of, is a national movement. I think of it as an anti-colonial resistance movement that is a culture of resistance that is supposed to be open to all people who care about each other, who love each other, who, not in a utopian way, but in a real way, because we want to have something different. But how do we think about that? How do we even speak with each other? And with all the history of colonialism, with all the history about, you know, sexuality in Islam, sexuality in Arab context, how do we think about all of this stuff? And you sit and you talk to a young queer person who comes to you and says, well, you know, this is really horrible. I've just been to a very wonderful, like very radical space in Palestine, a BDS space or whatever, and people actually, I felt that I've been discriminated against because I'm a queer, whether you're out or you're not out, okay? Maybe some people make comments or whatever. How do you think about that? What do you say to this young person? You can't just, okay, well, you know, the history and the subaltern can't speak and so on, and we know all of this stuff, it's true. But we do need to kind of like figure out, and that's a problem with the context, because in Arabic, we can have all these discussions, but when we're performing, and we are performing here, when we're performing in English, and we're trying to relay what we're saying to another audience and thinking about that, it's a very, very, you know, a very complicated situation. But it does keep takes us back. So how do we conduct the struggle in Arabic? How do we conduct among our community when there are a lot of people who are, I'm very queer friendly, I'm very supportive and so on. But then nobody says anything anywhere when these things are like coming up, and so I worry about being so pro-anti-colonial and being so pro-resistance that may actually disappear the legitimacy of the struggle of queer folks in Palestine. So I don't have an answer to it, but you know, like, I don't know if you can speak to it. If you can, it's okay. But
yeah, maybe like one example of an interaction with 20 executive directors of different human rights and feminist organizations in Ramallah that I was part of. I don't know how I got there, but when it was my turn to introduce the queer liberation struggle in Palestine, so you would see all of them like doing, like really moving in the like chairs, making these noises, and I was like enjoying it, right, and making it long speech to see how they're like really moving uncomfortably. And then a very famous human rights executive director of a very famous human rights organization comes to me when I was standing with 5 other folks, and I would say, you know what, Haneen, you need to learn how to talk about these issues with your society. And my first thought was like, wow, he's using my analysis against me, right? Because I was like, you know what, we invented the approach of like, we need to talk about with our society in a way that opening spaces, and you are like now using it against me. You cannot use it against me. And he was like, you know what, I know a lot of queer people who's like don't have the need to say they are queers. And I was like, really, so who are these like individuals? Men, middle class, really living alone because they're like coming from really comfortable economical, socioeconomic background. And I agree with you, then don't need me, and I don't need to struggle for them. I'm not struggling for people, I'm struggling for myself, that I'm right now being excluded from this movement that we all try to build. And he was like, you will never learn, young generation, something like that. And another like feminist ED, she would say, don't really take it personally. He doesn't understand what he's discussing, right? So it's another like way of dismissing the whole critique. I was like, oh, I'm really interested to have this discussion, and I wish you raised this question inside the formal discussion and not outside while we're drinking coffee. And I asked his permission to bring it back, and he was like, I'm going home, right? So we need to be more visible in these spaces in order to impact. Unfortunately, we have small number of people who can do that, right? And it's a big responsibility. So also bringing in allies that feel comfortable to do that, like Rabab and other people. It's not like making it also centralized on like queer individuals who sometimes can do that and sometimes can't do that. I feel really uncomfortable to be all the time in this position of doing that, because sometimes it's not my life. Because like LGBT experiences in Palestine so diverse, that I have my own story and have my own life and experience. So these like kind of challenges we face. I share your concern, and I think this should be one of our like major strategic points in the coming 5 years. We have been for long years really kind of underground, kind of defensive about like we need to take care of our society. I think it's a moment in history that we feel ready to go forward and suggest different spaces with different discourse and with like being more direct about these issues.
Take care of you.
Yeah. 429.
Yeah,
I'll just say something very quickly. It's a suggestion for you. Maybe one day it'll fit in. I noticed on your Facebook page the other day, when you were in LA, yes.
Oh my God,
when you were in LA, somebody came up to you, a Palestinian man, and said he was organizing for some kind of LGBT rights or something in the 70s or the 60s. What I would like to see ALQaws do, and I know Hilm are kind of trying to do it with a resource center at the moment. I really would like us to create a kind of an oral history project for that older generation. Yeah. Because the idea is that supposedly we've just had these Western, sexual categories been adopted by us or imposed on us recently. But I think the fact of same-sex desire is as old as any alternative sexual desire. So yeah, maybe I can talk you guys into really finding those members of our community, the elders of our community, to tell us the stories the history that we don't know anything about. And there was a story in Qadita, if you remember last time you were here 3 years ago, you told us about that story in Qadita about two men becoming intimate I think it was pre-Nakba in the 40s.
Yeah,
right? So there is this rich, fertile ground for ethnographic is probably not the right word, but fertile ground for oral history, that I see in our communities. And I would love ALQaws in collaboration with academic institutions to kind of go out and document that before it disappears.
Yeah. For whom don't read my Facebook page, I was in LA and really in a random way. I was in a meeting and an old guy. I introduced myself as I'm part of a queer organizing in Palestine, and he comes to me and said, like, though I'm a heterosexual man, in the 60s, 61, 62, I was like part of a group of 5 men who were like supporting LGBT gay men individuals in Jerusalem, and they had a network of 100 gay men in Jerusalem, right? It's even pre-Israel, right? It's like mind-blowing. And I was like, oh my God, I thought we are like not investing in exploring history of 90s, 80s. I didn't think we are talking about 60s, right? So I took his email, we will take it from there. I think it's really important.
Absolutely.
And also locate these people that were like immigrated and kicked out from their homes, right? So this history also erased because of the current political situation. I think it's super important, and I'm on board with any like ideas, suggestions. Thank you all for listening.
From ALQaws. We also have the brochure about Rasmiya, and I mentioned that we also have announcements of classes, and it's okay for people to get in touch with you if they are interested. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.
And thanks Haneen for a fantastic